know it's harder to run these type of studies, but I would love to see that data not related to dose, but related to blood levels. Because you know, for a while it was, you know, everybody was recommending vitamin D. And I have seen in recent years some of this pullback from that, saying, hey, you know what, it's maybe not necessary for most people. But generally, if we're looking like the standard units, people say, okay, under 30 is maybe problematic, under 20 is like pretty deficient. So I'll tell you just personally, I was at 17 on the blood test, so I started supplementing. Now, I personally take about 4 to 5 thousand IU's per day, which is obviously well above what you recommend. That again, just from the blood work, it's
So just to clarify, it's not what I recommend. It's what the Endocrine
yeah,
Society
yeah, yeah, sorry.
recommends. Yeah.
Um, and so that gets me into like the mid 40s. So it's not, because I have seen data suggesting that when you're at like 80 to 100 as far as like on the blood test, then you start getting problematic. So that's why it would be interesting, and maybe you know this answer. Are we just focusing on dose, or are we focusing on result? Because I would think that mid 40s is kind of like a pretty safe level. But what are your thoughts?
That's what the Endocrine Society in their updated guidelines also looked at is, these blood levels. What do they actually mean? Why do we have these ranges set where they are? And there's actually no good reason for it. It's a bit like trying to bake a cake when you don't know the degree that you should be baking your cake at. We don't know what the best level is, and the reason for that is so long as you're not, super duper deficient, like say below 10, um, there doesn't seem to be much difference in health between, going from say above 10 to above 50. So this blood test that we're doing, if we don't know the ranges that we should be trying to target, what, that gives even more reason as to not do the test in the first place. And
Right.
and further research needs to be done. But again, if it's a bit like magnesium. If people just reach the recommended daily intake, so in this case, again, 800 international units, you're getting all of the benefits that you need. And it means that you don't have to spend your money on vitamin D tests and trying to optimize that because actually that's not going to change, your cancer rates, your strength, your cardiovascular disease rates. There's no advantage
Yeah.
for supplementing with more than that outside of specific populations. For example, um, pregnant women, that there is some evidence to suggest that maybe you do want higher doses of vitamin D. And again, that's reflected in the Endocrine Society guidelines. But coming back to this, primary care, it seems quite simple because there's only a few things that we do. And the reason why we do that is those are the things that actually make a difference for people's health.
Right.
And we try and be laser focused, a bit like using a scalpel, to try and focus on those things so that we can actually shift the needle for patients' health.
Sure, and it makes sense. And not only is there the cost, but like you said, there are health risks to certain supplements. I mean, one, you have to even trust that the supplement is what it says it is, which, hopefully you're using a reputable brand. But obviously, like that's a whole separate topic of, can you trust necessarily the supplement industry? But then yeah, like it's something like I take a number of supplements, but I'm not huge on supplements. There's like a few key ones that I do take and recommend. But yeah, I agree. And I just literally watched the video you put out. I think it was today or in the last day on some of these supplements other people take. So that maybe is a good topic to kind of get into, where some of these things that we assume are just generally healthy. You mentioned calcium and iron and whatnot. That one, high levels might not be beneficial, but then two, particularly in a supplemental form, which we've seen with like, even going way back, vitamin E was another example, right? So do you want to touch on that at all? Like just like the idea that just because
Yeah.
it's good, that it's not necessarily good on a supplement.
Yeah, a lot of this is to do with the dose. So say for example with vitamin E, there's some evidence to suggest, and these are the evidence that I'm referring to here are meta-analyses. So where they pull together, different randomized clinical trials, cohort studies, etc. It seems that when people start taking vitamin E supplements, that's correlated with higher mortality rates, as in you're going to die earlier. And it's the same with vitamin A. Um, and the potential reason for it is that both vitamin A and vitamin E are antioxidants. And if we start to boost our levels of these, you potentially can disrupt the balance between oxidants and antioxidants in your body. That's a potential mechanism for it. And also, from a good diet, you're getting all of the vitamin A and vitamin E that you need.
Mhm.
So I personally don't take vitamin A or vitamin E supplements because of the data that is a bit concerning. It's the same also, say, with vitamin E and prostate cancer. There is some evidence to suggest that taking vitamin E supplements will increase your prostate cancer risks. So, taking even vitamins, you have to be careful that the dose is so critical. And if you're getting enough from your diet, you don't need to be supplementing with more because more is not always better. And another classic one is iron. So yeah, there is a patient population where potentially you do want to supplement with iron, and that's generally premenopausal women. So in those in that population, you potentially do want to start supplementing with iron. But for the vast majority of people, we're getting all of the iron that we need from our diet. And unless you've got specific absorption issues like inflammatory bowel
Bowel
disease, for example,
disease.
like Crohn's disease,
Yeah.
you might not be absorbing the iron that you need. And again, in that patient population, yes, you might want to be supplementing with iron, but for the vast majority of people, you don't need to be supplementing with iron because again, you're getting it all from your diet. And so I think, yeah, we just need to take a bit more of a dare I say, clinical approach to supplementation, where you're actually being a bit more targeted in terms of what you're putting in your body. Because there are some supplements that do have really good evidence, like creatine supplements, for example. That's a wonderful supplement for most people to be taking. And I think if we shift people's view to supplements like that, where if you do want to spend your money on supplements, go for things like creatine,
Right.
you can actually, again, shift the needle a bit for people.
Yep. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And obviously when I talk about like fitness and whatnot, that's a classic industry where a lot of people who are new to it are immediately looking for the supplement, which you look like a pretty fit guy, so I'm sure you've had plenty of experience there. But obviously, the vast majority of the results come from diet and lifting and whatnot. I mean, honestly, I even would say that supplements make a greater difference in health potentially than, let's say, like strength, performance. I mean, even creatine, which is the most studied supplement we have in that realm, I would say that it's likely it gives you this kind of bump and it doesn't necessarily change the curve or the rate of growth over time. Meaning, like in my like thought is, if you had two twins, one took creatine, 10 years, the other one took no creatine for 10 years, they lifted, everything else was identical. It's not like the one with creatine would just continually better and better and better. It might be like a 2 pound lean body mass boost or something like that. I don't, so I know you recommend it as well. I don't know if you have different thoughts on creatine specifically, but I think in the lifting realm, they can be very overhyped, obviously.
Yeah, they're definitely the cherry on top. But it would be interesting to have that, such a study like you've just mentioned. I think with creatine, though, there are a couple of other benefits in terms of cognitive performance.
Sure.
But in terms of muscles, it does seem there is some evidence to suggest that if you do take creatine supplements, you're less likely to get an injury. So maybe if over the long term, if people are getting less injured because they're taking creatine supplements,
Sure.
maybe that way you can potentially see a benefit. But yeah, I agree that supplements, they're definitely the cherry on top. The meat of health is diet, exercise, and sleep.